For our call to worship, we have some words from Douglas Taylor. There is one word that is particularly vital to understanding people who are in some way different. One word that allows for the hospitality toward strangers to be real and authentic. One word for the work of being an ally to come alive. The word is imagination. It is a critical piece of recognizing and honoring differences. Imagination builds a bridge between what I know of my experiences and what others share with me of theirs. This is why so much of religious language is built upon metaphors. I have an experience and then use analogy to help others imagine what my experience was like. Imagination translates and decodes. There are many things I have not experienced. I don't know what it is like to lose a child. I don't know what it is like to be openly gay. I don't know what it is like to be in prison. But I have experienced many other things, and I know how to listen, and I have a good imagination. So, let us ponder listening deeply to other people, entertaining strangers in our midst, and staying open to new connections emerging in ways we never expected. Our words for meditation are from Tanya Cothran. O great mystery, teach us to consider how others experience the world, to understand how our reality and their reality are different, and yet they share qualities of the same core desires. Teach us to listen for shared feelings, for places of connection, to be curious and open to hearing differences. Teach us to love into brokenness, to be patient with healing. Let us be strong in our vulnerability and in our not knowing. Let us be bearers of compassion, strong in knowing that in each person there is a radiant light of the soul. Give us the strength to keep feeling empathy even when we are tired and broken. For it is then that kind-heartedness can stream through us. Our theme is empathy. If you think about insulting somebody, walk a mile in their shoes. Then, if you insult them, you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. That's from Steve Martin. It's a variation on a serious cliche or saying. The Indians were the earlier versions, which was, if you judge somebody, first walk 2 moons in their moccasins. That was the old saying. I remember it from To Kill a Mockingbird, and the way Atticus Finch said it to Little Scout, his daughter, was, if you think badly of somebody, walk around in their skin for a while. These are little sayings about empathy, trying to see the perspective of others. The American Psychological Association defines empathy as understanding a person from his or her frame of reference rather than one's old, or vicariously experiencing that person's feelings, perceptions, and thoughts. There are 2 kinds of empathy. Affective empathy is actually feeling something akin to what somebody else is experiencing. A person tells you something very sad and you start to well up. You're actually emotionally connected. And that is the deepest kind of empathy. But you can't always have that. You don't always have that. Sometimes they're telling a story, and you can tell it's a sad story, you're not feeling it, but this is this word imagination. You can imagine what it's like, and you can say the appropriate thing. You might start with a phrase like, I won't tell you that I completely grab what you're experiencing, but it sounds terrible. It sounds rough, excruciating. You can say something that mirrors what they are saying, and that's from a more mental point of view, but it's a start. It's a start. There is a system called compassionate communication, sometimes called nonviolent communication. It's based on Carl Rogers' work, the idea of making I statements. That is, try to say something about your experience instead of judging or in any way blaming the person that we're upset with. Somebody is doing something, I don't like it, I'm rattled, to say, I'm rattled, instead of, I don't like it when you do X, Y, and Z. That's the blaming, judging. That is to suggest that my frustration is your fault. My frustration is my frustration. I need to own that, and somebody else might be in the same moment and not be frustrated at all. It isn't a gear turning that you do this and I feel that. My feeling is my feeling. It has to do with my history, my hang-ups, my fears, my vulnerabilities, my embarrassment, which is ample, and all kinds of things can set it off. The comedian Richard Lewis came from a Jewish family. He said, yes, I just had open guilt surgery. So we have these internal dynamics that are going on, and it is better to refer to them, to say something about what I feel. And the person, if they are listening, might tune into that and say, well, I could say it differently, or so they might want to change. But actually, the big value of this model isn't to get somebody else to do something differently. It's to look in the mirror and to ponder, why am I getting so upset about that? Because it isn't always totally necessary. And I don't have to change the world to have inner peace. I can work on that directly. I can make requests of the world. Sometimes they listen. You never know. Okay, our story is The Princess and the Pea. It's actually, the original name was The Real Princess, and it wasn't original to Hans Christian Andersen. He heard it in childhood, and scholars have traced it back at least 1,000 years. There are versions of in India long ago. It's not always a royalty story, it's not always a courtship story, and it's not always about a woman. This one, the familiar one, is about a princess, which brings in the whole princess thing, which we just had a marvelous variation of. And so, you know what the princess said at the photo counter? Someday my prince will come. Yeah, oh, if I don't get a groan, at least one groan per sermon, I'm just not trying. So what is this? What is this? Is this about a fussy girl? Is this somebody that's overly sensitive? Is it pathetic? Well, it's a little lighthearted story. It's Hans Christian Andersen's shortest story, very, very brief. And you think, oh, it's just a trivial thing. But these stories did not last so long for trivial reasons. There is more lurking. Now, on the surface, you have a courtship story. You have a prince, a little overprivileged, maybe entitled. He seems awfully fussy about his choice of partners and such. And you can think, oh, well, do I really want to hear a story about rich people? And, well, these stories weren't told in court. They were mostly told in the homes of peasants over the fire while they were working by women. Usually the older women would tell the stories while helping make the porridge or whatever they had to eat. They kind of liked them to be set in the castle. It sort of upped their spirits a little to have stories set in fancy places, but they really weren't about the ruling elite so much as about everyone's experience. But to really dig into the lessons, to the underlying wisdom, we're going to have to go into metaphor. We'll have to go symbolic to break through the surface. The surface layer is just cliches. Joseph Campbell talked about a story, a wisdom tale in particular, having a number of functions. And the two he zeroed in were the social function and the psychological or spiritual. The social function is where it's wagging a finger at you, telling you to be a good little boy or girl and do things right. That is so annoying, and besides, it goes out of style. It has a use-by date. So usually in these older stories, the stuff they're suggesting is really archaic, and we don't want to do it. We get a little annoyed. That's okay, I get annoyed too. That's at the superficial level of it. I don't like being told. I was told what to do a great deal early in life, and I've had enough of that now. What else you got? Well, a lot, as it happens. And there is a courtship tale which we could take as a metaphor for personal integration. The inner prince, whatever that is, needs to somehow get along with the inner princess. In fact, maybe we could have union. That's the wedding. What's the inner prince? Well, he's a seeker. He strives to be worthy of what life asks of him, which is, in his case, a king, but we're all ruling something. We have our contribution to make. And he's looking for something. Well, a partner, a wife, a mate, but more than that, the missing parts of himself. This is called conjunctio, fancy word for the sacred marriage, the internal union. How can the practical part of myself, which likes order, likes getting things done, wants a to-do list, and the more mysterious part of my inner life, the sacred part, the part that likes poetry and beautiful music, and goes to art museums just to be touched, even though I never studied art history, but what is this? These two parts of the inner life need to work together to have a good ruling prince, a good ruling principle, a good ruling energy where we can make a good contribution. So once there was a prince who wanted to be married, as the story begins. He met the local women. He lived in a beautiful castle with a beautiful garden and all that, but he was a little lonely. And none of the nearby princesses seemed quite right. I mean, they were all from good families. They were, some of them were pretty, most of them were smart, they were competent, they were pleasant, they had manners, but they didn't seem to him to be real princesses, even though he couldn't tell you if he needed to what that meant. They just weren't quite right. And so he traveled. He traveled far and wide, and he met all the princesses in all the lands that he traveled to. And some of them were pretty, and all of them were charming, and most of them were smart. And again, they were all from good families, but none of them seemed to be quite right. He couldn't find a real princess. And so he came home dejected. Okay, well, here's the part of us that is trying to figure life out, trying to move toward what we long for, even if we can't define it, that searches. This is the seeker function. And this is preparing for some important role in life, and we all have an important role in life. What he's seeking is an angel, not in the angelic sense of flying around in the heavens, but in the internal sense, sometimes called a genie or a guide. In the Sufi poetry, it's called the beloved of the soul. There's all this romantic poetry, but it's actually to a spiritual presence of some kind, whatever that is. The true princess represents our highest self, our essential nature. It is a call to recognize our inherent worth, to honor the subtle nudges of inner stirrings. But his travels do not go well. He comes home dejected. This is the slump part of the story, the downbeat part of the story. This is where life has set us back, sometimes called the dark night of the soul. Things are not working. We don't have order. We don't have fulfillment. We're in the dark. We have chaos. We have confusion. It happens more than once. I know once per story, but we live a lot of stories. So when we face difficulty, it is an opportunity to tune in to our sensitivity. These moments challenge us to remain true to our inner nature. The task is to merge emotion, sensitivity, vulnerability into practicality, mastery, control. Order has its uses, but change, growth, creativity involve disorder. These are the treasures of chaos. It is very counterintuitive to embrace chaos, to say, this is a good moment. I'm really confused today. This is great. Something's happening. No, we want to get out of it. Does somebody have an answer? Does somebody have a map? Does somebody have a book? Who can give me a good self-help book today? I don't like this. Yeah, we don't like it. You're not required to like it, but do draw the treasures out. There's something in that for us that may be the process of change. And you know the story. There is a dark and stormy night. Why does that sound like a cliche? It is raining cats and dogs. It is coming down in sheets. Nobody in their right mind would be out in that. And then there is a knock. Some versions say it's at the palace gate, some say it's at the front door, but the old king, who has better things to do, goes and opens the door himself. And I'm thinking, there's not many words in this story. I'm thinking, the butler is not expecting somebody to show up. They're down in the servants' quarters having a beer or something. They're not on the job. The old king goes to this, which is to say, the ruling party, the noble energy of our life goes out of curiosity to see who in the world would be out on a night like this. Opens the door, and the princess arrives. Now, it's her story. She is the central character, and she didn't show up for a while. And sometimes the meaning of life doesn't show up for a while in our searching. We have to wander around and get lost and go through more than one stormy night. Anyway, she arrives, and she is also a seeker. A seeker is about to meet a seeker. We're moving towards some kind of wholeness. She wonders if she could stay the night given how wet it is. She introduces herself as a princess. A princess. They don't know her. She doesn't look like a princess right now. She looks like a mop. She is soaked. Now, actually, the symbolism of water is usually spiritual purification, so it actually has some meaning, not just annoying here. And the storm itself might be a metaphor for personal uncertainty, for looking to find a place, in her case, an identity, which she has, but apparently it is placeless. It doesn't really have a grounding yet. She doesn't tidy herself up before she knocks on the door, whether that's possible or not. She doesn't seek to be socially acceptable. She seems to have some confidence in her princessness, but the household, they're confused. Well, is she a real princess? I mean, it's easy to say such a thing, but well, she's come through some trials and tribulations. Can they see who she really is? Maybe she's just a con artist trying to get something from them. After all, they have things. The old queen says, "We shall see." Now, the old queen is an archetypal guardian. She's the wise old woman. She upholds values. She's the part of us that honors integrity. The kingdom itself may represent the totality of one's life story and efforts, our true nature. So you know the story. The old queen puts a pea under the mattress, just a simple pea, and then another mattress on top of the usual mattress, and then another, and another, and another, until there are 20 mattresses, and the graphics are usually quite delightful. You see the stack. Oh, that's not all. Then she puts a comforter, a quilt. It's a down quilt. It's called a feather bed. It's made of duck feathers, and they're the softest you can possibly have. This is a wonderful luxury, like a really beautiful duvet, and then another, until there are 20 feather beds on top of the 20 mattresses. And usually there's a rickety ladder of some kind to get into this bed. And this, what is this? This is the central image of the story. This is the name in many retellings of the story, the princess and the pea. Well, that laying on of layers. Sometimes we have many layers covering our true essence. Sometimes we have many layers covering some trouble, some discomfort, and we attempt to find comfort. We attempt to avoid something. It doesn't always work, but we pile on these layers, distractions, possessions, achievements, thinking that we will get comfort from them. We are aware of the pea, though. We can identify with the princess. There is that memory or that little discomfort we feel under. We usually lie on a mattress unconsciously, but this doesn't work too well. You know the story. She can't sleep. She's black and blue in the morning. She says, "I don't know why that bed was so uncomfortable." She remains aware of that pea. There's amazing sensitivity, which is the key to the story and why we're exploring it today. What is the source of the discomfort? Well, it can be something unresolved, some inner work we haven't done. But notice that it's a P, it's a seed. It is, in essence, potentiality, but it will need to be honored, noticed, owned, and planted, nourished to become what it can be for us. And what happens in the story? Well, the household decides she must be a real princess because only someone of this quality could sense such a thing so subtle under all those mattresses and all those feather beds. And so the prince wants to marry her, and there is a wedding. Happy story, happy ending. But the ending of the story is the least of it. It is the union of that practicality and the mysterious sensitivity that she brings to the story that is the real punchline for it. We need both. We need our can-do activism, and we need our sensitivity to others. Say you want to be an activist in social justice, you want to help people who have not been given a fair shake. Well, great. You get motivated, you get organized, you sign up a bunch of Unitarians, you organize something. Yeah, we also need to go talk to those folks and see what they need. We need to do some listening so that we don't just roll in for what we think they should need. We may not know. In fact, we don't. That's the point of empathy, is to start from not knowing, to assume that we don't understand people, and to listen a lot. It's about seeing beyond the surface. So here we have a story of sensitivity, suggesting that true nobility is not in fancy clothes and fancy titles, but in a quality of personality. There is something called the empath, which is, several books have been written about it, and a lot of jokes. And there was an earlier book called The Highly Sensitive Person, written by a woman I knew that was actually one of my doctoral students years ago. And it suggests that some people are more vulnerable, more open, more able to read the invisible signs with others. That's great. It also suggests that it can be nurtured. This is something we all have the potential for. Some people seem to fall in it naturally. It is very useful to have a highly sensitive person on your team. If you've got a project going and you've got somebody that's always wanting to slow it down, well, we need to think this through a little more. We need to ask more questions. That's a very valuable quality, and most of us are kind of in a hurry. We want to accomplish things, let's get a lot done. Somebody needs to process it a little more. Value that participation. That is bringing a dimension of the unseen into the conversation. We need to look beneath the surface, just like we're looking beneath the surface of this story. We need to look between the surface of situations so that we don't go off and make more harm than we intended. So, how to be more empathetic? This is the action portion of the day. It reminds me of the time I was asked what the difference is between ignorance and empathy. I was just annoyed. I said, I don't know and I don't care. So how to show empathy, particularly in situations of diversity, and frankly, every conversation is a cross-cultural encounter. People may look similar, they are different. And then sometimes we are dealing with people who are obviously quite different, from a very different walk of life. To assume we do not understand, first of all, ask questions, a lot of questions. Shut up and ask questions. Watch for their body language. A person might say, oh, you know, that nice thing that I was hoping to get is not going to work out. And you think, oh, that's too bad. But you notice that they're kind of smiling. Maybe they had kind of mixed feelings about it. So don't say the cliche answer. Say, well, that sounds like a change of plans or something. Tell me more. Try to hold off your assumptions, because it might turn out to say, yeah, actually it was something my husband wanted and I really didn't want it at all, but I tried to make nice. And you realize it's kind of a relief that they actually are experiencing something we didn't expect. And you'll usually see it in their body language or their expression or something. Try not to share personal examples. This is maybe the biggest thing I have to say today about the art of empathy. Because there's a natural temptation if somebody tells you a story, oh, I had an experience like that. Well, what we've done, a couple things. First, we've changed the subject from your distress today to me, which I do understand is the most important thing in the world, but shut up and listen longer. There's an acronym, WAIT. Why am I talking? At the moment, I'm supposed to be talking, but when I'm trying to be of some help in a friendship situation or a counseling situation, I need to try to hear more and talk less. And besides, I did not have an experience like that. What has happened is that your story has reminded me of my story. Let's talk about my story. And off we go. And sometimes that happens, the temptation to do that comes very quickly, particularly if what my friend is saying is distressing. Because if I can talk about me, I'll get over to how I solved the problem. That's another thing, don't offer help too quickly. We want to offer help eventually, but the biggest help is to listen to this distress. Actually, either I'm going to say something that's dumb, it's so obvious, because that's something that everybody says, which probably doesn't need to happen at all, or I'm going to say some answer that worked for me and isn't even appropriate to you. So most of my advice isn't worth much. So hold off on that and then keep it short. If you cannot resist the temptation to talk about yourself, keep it really short. And then come back quickly and say, but tell me more about the cliche of this is the Hollywood party where the famous actor says, well, enough about me. What do you think of my new movie? Okay, terribly old story. Not only should you listen, but tell them you are willing to listen, if it's true. If you have it in your heart to listen, say, I can see you're really going something. Through something. I don't know that I have big answers, but I can listen. And then mean it and do a lot of listening. They have found research on trauma, like a major fire, that people will need to tell the story many times, that it is a way of lifting off the trauma. Way to recover from the deep, abiding anxiety is to tell it many times. And fortunately, in relief teams, when they send counselors and mental health people into situations like that, they trade off. They'll listen to the story 2 or 3 times and they say, you know, I need to do something, but Joe's on during this session, and you bring another counselor in so that they can say, because one person, there's a limit. My sister was in the Northridge earthquake, was quite near the epicenter, and their house shook and the things fell down and the block wall in the backyard fell over and all kinds of things. And animals were hurt, and it was a very sad situation. I must have listened to that story 20 times. I come from a very big family. All of my siblings listened to it at least 20 times, and I'm sure all of her friends at school where she teaches and things. So it is. Another thing you can do to deepen your empathy is to read fiction. Read the stories of others, get into others' realities. If you're interested in cross-cultural work and diversity work, read about their experience. Noted books, preferably written by people from that group. I was in the Live Oak book group for a while, couldn't keep up, and finally it was wonderful, but I had too much other reading. There were several books that came during the period I was in that on Native American experience. And I know the inner life of some tribe band in British Columbia that I had never heard of before, and because it was an engaging novel, that'll stay with me forever. And that is one way to get inside somebody else's experience. Try to get to know some people unlike yourself. I'll tell you where Ann and I meet people. We are also dancers, and we go out a couple times a week to dance, and the dance community is not a bunch of Unitarians. I actually see a couple of y'all there from time to time. I see Eric at the contra dancing, which is a much bigger crowd. It's really interesting. And I'm dancing with Republicans, and I'm dancing with people of color, and I'm dancing with young people, and then there's, you know, some nibbles and social time and everything. I'm not just talking to my own tribe, and I find that deeply valuable to have a way to access the rest of the world. And I hear why people are voting for somebody that I would think is a strange choice. Well, now let me see if I can try to remember this joke, which I should not be telling from the pulpit. This is the time that Donald Trump walked into a bar, not realizing that the bartender was actually a genie. And the bartender says, so what can I get you? And he said, something that I'll regret in the morning. So the genie bartender gave him a conscience, a humility, and empathy. I'll hear about that one. I do have a problem with jokes. Anyway, what else can we do? Consider alternative explanations for somebody else's behavior. I'm a fast driver. I move along on the freeway. If somebody's like really slow on the freeway, I'm going, I got places to be. I got to get out of Live Oak. Somebody's expecting me. And then I very slowly get around them and wait for the truck to move and slowly, and I look over, not to make a gesture of any kind, just to see who in the world, and there is somebody who is much more fragile than I am, who is clearly scared of driving, who is doing the best they can. And I had some assumption that somebody's on their cell phone chatting with me, but it's not that at all. I didn't understand. What do I know from the back of a car? Okay. I was at a dance, I was taking a cookie, and the person behind me got really irritated at me because I was taking a long time. I mean, not a long time, but I wasn't just picking up a cookie and getting out of the way so the next person. And then he grumped at me something about when your hand was in the way, I couldn't. They were stuck together. I was trying not to take a whole bunch of cookies. I was trying to peel one off the top, and they were really pretty well stuck. And I didn't sit there and explain to this grouch why in the world it took so long. But okay, whatever we're irritated about, maybe there is some other explanation than what we're sure is going on. And my closing cliche is an old saying, be kind. Everyone you meet is carrying a heavy burden.